Welcome to the National Reentry Network for Returning Citizens Black Table Edition, and we will have a conversation on our podcast dealing with things that's going on in the communities, in the justice system, and many more other things. But we're going to dive into what we have going on. I am Travis Register. To my left, I have Jonah Smith. To my right, I have Foster Sellers, and we have a special guest from DC Justice Lab. And our special guest, we mind sharing your name?
Yeah, everyone. Hey, my name's Jessa. I'm from DC Justice Lab. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
I know you're a busy woman over there in DC Justice Lab, so you got a lot of stuff going on. So thank you for taking the time out to share this information that we have dealing with the criminal consequences for failing to appear.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to dive right off into that. And Jonah, I believe you had the first question.
Yeah, hi. Of course, you're an expert in the criminal consequences of failure to appear,
Yeah.
and that's one of the reasons why you're a fellow at the DC Justice Lab, which is wonderful. We actually are in a place that's very close,
Yeah.
office-wise. We share a building. Before you delve into the critical consequences of failure to appear, bring us and the audience up to speed a little bit on your background, where you're from, and what your path through law school was like, and how you came to be interested in the current work you're pursuing.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Omaha, Nebraska, and as you guys all might know, it's a predominantly white state, and a conservative state at that. And my path here with criminal justice initially started when I was in college. I started out as a biology major.
Right.
Decided that was completely not my path at all.
Sorry to hear that. Really sorry to hear that.
Completely bombed genetics. I had to take it twice and still ended up with a D+.
Oh,
So,
no. So naturally, law school, no math, no complex equations.
Naturally, my advisor said, you might want to pick something different. And so at that point, I had settled on doing just a regular criminal justice course, like an introductory course. And that was where it really started. I had a professor, his name was Dr. Hoffman. I ended up taking him for several courses after the introductory
Where was
class.
this?
This was the University of Nebraska at Omaha.
Okay.
Yeah. And so after taking some of his introductory classes, I took a race and law class. I took, I can't even remember what the other one was called. But basically, as part of the classes, he required volunteer service or externship experience.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, so one of the first classes I took with him, we were studying the disproportionate impacts of police contact with black youth in Omaha. And we were reporting to the mayor, the police chief, whoever was interested, including the Disproportionate Minority Contact Board, which was established in Omaha, to think about imaginative ways in which we can reduce harmful contacts for black youth. And part of that looked at us interviewing black youth that were inside the youth detention facility on their experiences with youth.
First-hand information.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time in the youth detention facility that was circling through interviews, but also just getting to know the children, doing like connectivity activities, and just kind of like doing like bonding and social type of like activities.
It's an overwhelmingly male population, isn't it?
Overwhelmingly.
Just like throughout the criminal justice.
I don't think I interviewed any females while I was there, actually.
Wow.
And it was predominantly women who were in my class. So it was women coming into the jail and interviewing black males.
Classic mothering, right?
Yeah,
like an
yeah.
archetypal Carl Jung says.
Yeah.
That's that inner mother coming
Yeah.
out. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and so my very first experience there, I felt like I was giving sort of these like tried but not true sort of solutions of, let's do community building practices. Let's like get police officers to come to these events where we can get to know officers and children better. And then it turned out that I learned that was not really so much of a solution, but something that had already been proposed before and was not necessarily working.
It's probably easy and is highly visible.
Yeah. But I felt like it was my first step into the criminal justice system, because I felt like I was much more involved than some of the other students in my class who were advising that we just have talk sessions, which I thought was not nearly enough. But yeah, but so then as I went on into my career, it was my ideas were developed. The next class that I took with Dr. Hoffman included us working in an after-school program that was for at-risk Black youth, and that included doing tutoring in sports and arts and all of those sorts of things. So that was another experience that I was able to get, where they were able to share with me some of their experiences, not necessarily in the sphere of police contacts, but just being at risk and being at risk for not only crime but for poverty. And these are children who were low income students, obviously. And so it was an interesting interaction that I was able to have for a year in I think that was my junior year of college.
And that made an impact on you, it sure sounds like.
Yeah. And so from then on, criminal justice actually became my major, and sociology became my minor. And from then on, I was able to figure out more so what I wanted to do. I wanted to stay within the criminal justice field, but I didn't know where. My senior year, I was an intern for the Omaha Police Department.
Wow.
Actually, so I was working in the auto theft unit.
Oh.
Yeah, so I was following.
Fast and Furious.
Yeah, I was following up on people who stole cars.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But I got to see the negative side
Yeah.
of policing, and I got to see the negative side of stops and searches, arrests. And we were showing up at people's houses and saying, "We think you stole a car. Tell us about it."
Hey.
I was learning how to do searches of cars. I got to do. I got to help execute arrest warrants. I got to do police beats. And then it was something that it turned out I knew I did not want to go into the criminal justice field as a police officer or an investigator or a detective. I wanted to be on the other side of it.
With your legal knowledge now, and presumably you've taken common law too, and so you're familiar. Well, anyway, with the knowledge that you have now, do you look back on your experience policing and can you find due process violations and search and seizure, Fourth and Fifth Amendment kind of violations?
I don't know if I can say that
Okay.
specifically, but I can say that I can look back and see the excitement that is in police officers. When I was sitting in the office, part of my job was to go through FBI records and report data to all the cars that report to the FBI cars that either had been recovered or had received insurance coverage, so we could take them off the list and see what cars were still missing, what parts were going where, and it was sort of a tracking system. And through that, I was able to kind of look through these books. They had a big stack of papers of all the people who they knew in the community were likely to steal cars. They had pictures, and they had information on them, and it was used.
How do you predict something like that? I mean, that's like Minority Report. I mean, Philip K. Dick wrote a book about that, and Tom Cruise starred in a movie about that very subject.
Yeah. Well, so here's the kind of the weirder thing. I wouldn't say I had as much of a contacts with Black individuals. I was actually having more contact with white individuals in this area. But I was still able to see how they were to develop the information that they used to build a warrant. It was interesting. You would flip through the book and just listen to officers kind of make offhand remarks about some of the people who they've had several contacts with, and just thinking about, again, I'm going back to the excitement about of arresting and actually detaining and going through the process of following through with the sentence. There was excitement for officers to see the process through, and that was something that rubbed off on me, but it kind of gave me the ick.
It seems like your professor, Mr. Hoffman, had a special impact on you from your time with policing and working with at-risk youth to the job that you got. What would you say some of your advice would be to those who are seeking some of a similar career path?
I think that the number one thing that I would say to anyone who's in this career path is that you have to be like very strong-willed in what you want to do. You can't really bend just because there's money coming your way of a job that looks more promising and and pays more well, but it disrupts your your morality. That's the one thing for me is that I had to make a decision of do I want to choose this job that is more secure, but it doesn't sit well with me, or do I want to do something that is close to my heart, but in the long run I might not get paid as much to do it.
So that's awesome. I was going to ask early on, like, how did you get connected with DC Justice Lab?
Yeah, so let me back up a little bit to 2018. So I graduated from University of Nebraska, Omaha, and I sat there and I had no idea what I wanted to do when I graduated college.
Yeah, so that's when you knew you wanted to be a biologist.
Yeah, and so then I had switched over to criminal justice, but I was like, well, what am I supposed to be doing in this field where I don't want to be an officer, but that was the sort of way that most of my classmates were going is you get your degree, you go into the police department.
Most police officers have that exact degree, right?
Right, yeah, the study of criminology. So I wanted to do something different, and because I didn't know what to do, I applied to the Peace Corps. And I was like, this will give me some time to figure out what I want to do. Yeah, so I left for Peace Corps that following September. And I served about a year in Madagascar as an English teacher. Completely different from, what I thought I would be doing.
Madagascar, that's incredible.
Yeah,
That is incredible. I've always dreamt of going to that place.
It's a beautiful country. It really is. But I mean, so there I'm learning. I learned a new language. I also, that was where some of the skills that I've developed now came from. Actually, is learning to actually hear people, because when you're in a position where you're the only American citizen, the only English speaker in your community, you have to sit there and figure out what the heck they're saying to you. And you can't really speak at them because they don't know English. So you have to speak it in their language. And it became like a core skill of learning that, the things that I'm learning are not, or the things that I think that I know are not always right. And the things that I'm learning have to come from someone else's perspective rather than just me trying to force my perspective on them. They were very open to the Western ideas that I had and almost looked at me as if I was a savior, but that was very much not the way that I wanted to come off to the people who I was living among. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you ended up in the Peace Corps before coming here to the DC Justice Lab.
Yeah, so I came back from the Peace Corps, and again, I was in a spot where I was like, I still don't know what to do with this degree. So I spent some time working at a psychiatric hospital for a little bit.
But you had a gig as a savior. Why did you give up your gig as a savior?
Well, actually, I was sent home on a medical hold. So there was some unfortunate things that happened in Madagascar that made me want to come home and stay home.
Okay.
I've been treated as a savior too.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. I know a little bit about what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I got sick in West Africa. I came down with something, and so I was taken to a hospital. And outside of the hospital, there were hundreds and hundreds of people waiting.
Yeah.
Who had been waiting for days.
Yeah.
And guess who got hauled to the very front in front of everybody and treated right away.
Yeah, so the interesting, though, about my experience, though, is that although I was American, in what was the time when I was there, one of the poorest countries in the world, I wasn't treated necessarily like I was a savior outside of my community because of my skin tone. I blended right in with the people of Madagascar. It's when they heard me speak that they go, whoa, you're not from here. Okay, go to the front of the car. You don't sit in the back on top of the heater, and you don't get to squish in with the children. That was when they gave me the extra treatment. But within my community, I was very highly regarded, almost like a celebrity. Yes. But it was something that I didn't really like very much because it was almost like embarrassing for me.
A lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Celebrity, that's exactly how I described it. I feel like a celebrity.
Yeah. And it still was a very interesting experience, because I was able to connect with people that I would have never once imagined that I'd be connecting with, and I was able to practice another language, which also then developed my career path even further. But so once I came back from Madagascar, though, I was working as a psychiatric technician in a youth hospital. So I was dealing with kids who had substance abuse issues, who were suicidal, who were homicidal, runaways, those sorts of things. And then in 2020 is when I got accepted to law school at Howard, and that's why I came to DC.
It sounds like it doesn't sound like it's what it is that everything that you went through to this present point on your school, on your career journey, it actually helped for what you are today.
Yeah.
It helped build you and mold you. I mean, because you dealt with children, you dealt with foreign children, you dealt with youth that that was getting in trouble, things that man, and it helped out your social skills. It helped out your empathy, your sympathy, towards these individuals, as well as a type of I don't want to say a social worker, but almost like a social worker, to where you're able to identify with these young people, and able to help them out. And even though you're on the legal side, to where it's like, because we won't get into the consequences of failing to appear and things that manner, but you get a chance to not just be like you was with the police officer and be like, hey, we're going to apprehend, we're going to oppress.
Yeah.
You see both sides.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because most of my background, as I've described to you, deals with youth. But I mostly got into the adult criminal justice side of things when I was working as a psychiatric technician. That was a night job. I was working from like 11 o'clock at night to 7 in the morning, sleeping a little bit. But during the day, I was doing legal advocacy with the governor of Nebraska. So
not just anybody.
Yeah.
The governor.
So I worked with an organization called Black Votes Matter, which was a local organization dedicated to increasing black voters, increasing black registration, and then we also did some mass incarceration advocacy, dealing with formerly incarcerated people in Nebraska. And that's what led me to being able to connect with the governor's office, and then Scott Frakes, who was the director of the Department of Corrections for the state of Nebraska.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
So it was Howard University that brought you out to the district?
Yeah, it was Howard that brought me out. Yeah, and so that...
You have a HU in the house?
Yeah,
Big Bison.
And it was cool because it was like I found myself getting into these like narrower spaces until I was finally able to figure out what I wanted to do. And so Howard was, to me, a place where I was like, HBCU, this is seems like it's a predominantly black issue, though not entirely, but it seems like mass incarceration, which is where I was heading towards, is an issue that is, heavily affects the black community. And so I wanted, again, another lens to be able to look through to further develop my career in that way.
So it sounds like you didn't follow work. You followed purpose.
Yeah. It was very much a purpose thing. I would say that I'm faith driven.
Yeah.
And so when I reconnected with God, which was actually 2 years ago, we'll talk about that in a later podcast. When I started to be with God again, then I knew that this was the path that He was leading me towards, and that's why I say stick to your morality. And that was where I really got that foundation from.
All right.
Yeah.
Shout out to Jesus.
Yep.
So how do we learn a little bit more about your current expertise or your current research in criminal consequences for failing to appear?
Yeah, so right now I
can tell you some of them from personal experience.
Yeah.
If you'd like to know.
Yeah.
And the key findings too.
Yeah, I can write the whole thing for you. Just but please go ahead, Ed.
Yeah.
We
So
can talk stories later. I'd like to hear the pro.
Yeah, so this is not necessarily a new topic for me. So when I was in law school, I was an intern with Civil Rights Corps. Part of my work there, I was a policy intern. I was working on bail reform issues across the country, particularly in Michigan. And I was working on some judicial policy things in Texas as well. But failure to appear was a broader project that I was working in across the country. So that's why I chose the project to narrow to DC, since DC Justice Lab is a DC-based organization. And when I was looking at the codes, I found that there were either things on books that were either not being applied, that were just, not being enforced, or that were being punished disproportionately.
Yeah, for myself, when I was involved with the criminal justice system, I was a failure to not appear, and there was a warrant for my arrest.
Right.
And I was out in the community, and I had gotten, stopped by a police officer, and they ran my ID, and they took me in, at that point, because they were like, "There's a warrant out for your arrest." Can you explain to us some of the punishments or the key findings about that? Like, is that the normal process that they're supposed to go through?
Yeah, the normal process. So when you fail to appear, a warrant is immediately issued for your arrest. That's different from other jurisdictions where they might give you sometimes either a 2 to 3 day period to return to court. There's also jurisdictions that give you up to 30 days to give you a continuance to show back up to court. DC is one of those jurisdictions that does not give you a grace period to return to court. So an arrest warrant is immediately given upon your failure to appear.
And then they gave me I couldn't post bail, and I was in further trouble there. I'm fascinated by this topic because that's something that I experienced or whatever. But it seems like, what do the other jurisdictions do that is different from DC?
Yeah, I believe Illinois and Texas are both different. Those are the two jurisdictions I'm studying right now for model legislation. Those are the two that I mentioned before that either have North Carolina is also one too, not on a statewide level, but on a local level. There's a couple counties that allow a 3-day grace period. But Illinois and Texas are those other states that apply either that 30-day continuance or some sort of grace period.
So what happens during those 3 days? Is it expected that the person who missed court might remember that they missed, or whatever emergency?
Yeah, or that
they show back up?
They might show back up, or also they would have a call that would come from whoever their agency that is supposed to be supervising them would follow up with them and remind them that they're supposed to come back to court before an actual warrant is issued.
So if they follow through with that, then there is no FTA.
Then there is no FTA charge if they show back up, right? Okay. Which is different from DC.
Yeah, and a lot of other places.
Yeah. So basically, though, after the arrest warrant is issued, what I'm seeing, though, is that most people are either given jail time or probation time, or some sort of pretrial detainment time. In DC, the one way that is a little bit different from other jurisdictions, and not all, but the failure to appear charges are based upon the underlying charge and that type of charge. So whether it's a felony or a misdemeanor. And what's on the books right now is that for a felony, you can get up to 1 to 5 years additional and consecutive sentencing, or up to a $12,000 fine, which is, I have not seen any fines given in the last 3 years from the data that I've collected. But for misdemeanors, you can get either from 90 days to 180 days and receive, I believe it's a $1,200 fine. I believe. I'd have to double check that. But again, no fines are being assessed from the data points that I've seen within the last, well, actually that's 5 years. So I have data back to 2018. I haven't seen any fines assessed. So that's one thing I'm talking about, where there's something on the books, but it doesn't look like it's being executed.
So people if they could afford to pay the fine, they would get out. But it seems like they're just locking people up.
Well, so no, it's not necessarily a fine for failure to appear. They can still receive both a detention and a fine. It's not necessarily that they have to pay the fine to get out of the failure to appear charge. It's simply that they're assessed a fine as a punishment to their failing to appear. It's not if they pay off the fine, then they don't get the charge. They can still have the fine and still get the charge.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, that's some. We're sitting here listening, and it's like, Jessa, you got so much poured into you in a small amount of time. And at the same time you've been poured into, you're also pouring out now.
Yeah.
And with that type of information, you have a responsibility.
Yeah.
To pour out. And everybody's, their avenues and their purposes are different. But you found yours. And now and your way of fulfilling your purpose, you're doing it with compassion.
Yeah.
You have a job to do, of course.
Yeah.
But there's heartfelt as well.
Mhm.
And I applaud you for that, salute you for that, and I just want to congratulate you for what you're doing.
Thank you. I mean, I see this as a much bigger issue than just people are receiving consecutive sentences. So from the data that I'm looking at, just in the year of 2023, there's been over 29,000 arrests, right?
Wow.
That's arrests alone, right? And so you're thinking about 10% of those people, according to the PSA, do not show up to court. So you're thinking about 2,900 people right now that have a failure to appear charge or some sort of violation of the Bail Reform Act.
Does that seem to remain consistent over time? That it's a 10% rate?
Yeah, so that's the rate that they're posting. The PSA data that I've seen runs from anywhere from 89 to 92% as people who do appear to court.
Does that vary greatly by jurisdiction across states?
So actually, DC is a model jurisdiction for failure to
Really?
for jurisdictions for getting people to appear to court. So that's an extremely high amount of people who are appearing to court and not being arrested and not failing to appear.
Right.
That's much higher than other jurisdictions. And so when you think about it, there's this small amount of people. There's this 10% of people who are failing to appear, right? But you also have to consider the number of conditions that people are getting on either release for pretrial or on probation. And you're also having to consider the overlapping inconsistencies of conditions of release and also appearing to court, and how the conditions that are given by the judge might affect someone's ability to appear to court in the first place.
Mm.
How emotional taxing is it for this line of work that you're doing?
It's not taxing to me. I wouldn't say that. I mean, it's something that I enjoy doing. It's something that is really just like fulfilling to me. Yeah.
Okay, I know dealing with people,
Yeah.
and then people on that side of the law,
Yeah.
what we call the opposite side of the
Yeah.
law. It's this it's a lot of pull and tug,
Mhm.
and it can be draining at times. But I guess in where you're coming from, you've been equipped.
Mhm.
You've been, like we said, you've been poured into,
Yeah.
and you pretty much have counted the cost,
Yeah.
and you know what it's going to take. So
Yeah.
I like that it's not taxing to you.
Yeah.
That means you don't get burnt out.
No. It's not something that's overwhelming or overburdening to me at all.
Cause this is something that never stops.
Yeah.
People gonna get locked up. They'll have the bail hearings. You gotta go chase people and things of that manner. Well, not
Yeah.
necessarily you, but
Yeah.
the constant intersections that's crossing things of that manner. Just a lot.
Mhm.
For our audience who might not know what the Bail Reform Act is, can you give us some history?
Yeah, so it's federal law, but applied in DC. This is the DC code. So this is DC code 231327 A. A1 is your felony sentencing. A2 is your misdemeanor sentencing. And it's a little bit different from an actual failure to appear, which most people they put a failure to in an umbrella term. The Bail Reform Act is actually a little bit separate because the failures to appear is actually in Title 22, relating to citations for release. So DC has a citation process where if you're stopped, such as for like a traffic incident, they can give you a citation to appear to court without you having to be arrested. That is actually what failure to appear is attached to. The Bail Reform Act is attached to people who are either on supervised release by probation, parole, or for their pretrial release.
All right. Got another follow-up question to that?
Yeah, I didn't know it worked like that. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the audience would appreciate having a better understanding of what the Bail Reform Act is here
Yeah.
in D.C.
Yeah.
What would you say the central line of questioning you're pursuing is now? What's the central question that you're seeking to answer during your fellowship?
There's a lot, but really what I'm trying to get at is I want to see DC post some sort of data on not just what they're doing good, which is getting people to court, good job, but they're not talking about the opposite side of how many people they're actually punishing for things that are certainly out of their control. So as as I've said before, there's model jurisdictional language that points to circumstances that the judge would have to consider before they're able to issue a warrant. They would have to give adequate notice. They would have to give, in North Carolina or Georgia, these states require that the person who's supposed to appear to court has to formally acknowledge that they have a court date. They have to acknowledge the time. They have to acknowledge the date, the courtroom. In North Carolina, they're also experimenting with shorter court appearance times to get people to appear to court so they're not missing a whole day's worth of work. I've even seen suggestions to schedule people to appear to court by their lawyer, by their public defender, so they have a period of time in which they're supposed to appear, and they're not having to take the entire day off, but maybe a 2-hour period or a 4-hour period. There's lots of things that are available in DC that are not actually being implemented to make it easier for people to not only appear to court, but also not to face the stacking of sentences that they get if they don't appear.
That's what I was sitting here thinking. I mean, you get to a courthouse on any given day, it's hectic. People trying to get in, those who are there to be a part of the courthouse proceedings, but it's like they changed the courtroom the day of, and you had no idea, and then therefore you're now punished for that.
Right, and I've heard of people being, 15 minutes late, and they haven't even called their name yet, but they're considered late because they're not within the specified period of which they were supposed to show up.
Unbelievable. What are some misconceptions in your line of work, dealing with, with the bailing and things that matter? What are some of the misconceptions that need to be cleared up?
Misconceptions. I don't know. There's nothing that really comes to mind, but I think one of the biggest things that I was unfamiliar about when I first started with this, that there was a difference between the bail reform violation and a failure to appear violation, that they're two separate things, but often grouped into the same category. That was one thing that I was like, whoa, this is completely different. That was the first thing to me, but I don't really know of any misconceptions that I can think of right now.
What was the underlying reason for that? Did the court give an underlying reason why those two seemingly similar FTAs are treated differently?
No, and I haven't really gotten to speak to the court. I've asked the court for this information and was denied, actually. So what I'm having to do is go off of the statutes and just off of hearings that I'm going to and what people are saying. I'm not able to actually ask the court because I was denied.
And FTA is failure to appear?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
What would you say to critics who would suggest that, or who might accuse us of making it more dangerous for people on the outside by releasing individuals more easily, making it more easy for people who've been arrested to go back out into society prior to their trial rather than being incarcerated prior to their trial?
Right. So here's the thing that I would say. Again, I cited that about 29,000 people in D.C. are arrested, right, to date. 24,000 of those are property crimes or low-level offenses. So only 5,000 of those, if you're doing a deduction, are for violent crimes. In D.C., we also have emergency legislation that creates a rebuttable presumption for those who are violent offenders and who are armed at the time that they are arrested to detain them. And that's something that we're talking about constantly in DC is an uptick in violent crime. But we have emergency legislation that creates a presumption that they should be detained.
So that exists currently, the rebuttable presumption?
That exists currently, and that's written into the code. But the majority of people who are being arrested, and this is across every jurisdiction, are nonviolent, low-level offenders. These are people who are breaking and entering, not breaking and entering. They're, breaking into, I've seen many cases about, people stealing things from gas stations. Or, I watched a court case one time where a guy had so many charges, and his last charge was that he was stealing a pickle jar from a gas station. And it's such, and it was worth $1.70, right? You have things like this. There's obviously a homeless problem in DC.
Right.
The majority of crimes that are being committed or that are actually being arrested for are not violent crimes.
And I can say, too, that some substantial proportion of the people who are arrested end up being not guilty, right?
Right.
I mean, the police are not 100% effective.
Right.
So one of the negative consequences of getting detained prior to any kind of a trial, like we're talking about here, one of the consequences of not paying your bail and being stuck in jail is that your job goes away.
Right.
Most people end up, just because they're being arrested for stealing a $1 pickle jar,
Yeah.
they will, as a result, lose their job. They will likely lose their housing because if they're staying in a shelter, they have to check in every single night.
Right.
If they're in rehab, then they have to be in rehab every
Yeah.
night. And if they're in an apartment, they're going to be evicted if they don't pay rent in a timely fashion.
Right.
So what ends up being an arrest for a $1 jar of pickles ends up being an absolutely catastrophic event
Yeah.
in the lives of these people.
Yeah.
Something that really doesn't happen to most human beings on earth. Most human beings on earth don't lose their job and their house and everything all at the same time.
Right.
But this does exactly that.
Right. And we know that there's research that leads us to see that even one day in detention is harmful for people. Even one day. Extending it past that one day obviously increases your levels of mental
Anguish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
Financial woes.
it separates you from your children, and it creates consequences upon the children. They're missing their parent, and there's some states that are even going as far as wanting to terminate parental rights based on times of incarceration for the parent.
I know it was devastating because of the community that I lived in was a small community, and when I was first arrested for what turned out to be a misdemeanor, wrecked a substantial portion of my life because of the little town that I lived in. My daughters who were in school, their parents, everybody's parents, already knew immediately.
Yeah.
So there can be devastating consequences.
To your reputation.
What never seems to happen, though, is the follow-up report that says, "Oh, he was arrested for this, but he was let go because
Right.
there's no follow-up
Right.
to exonerate or clean up that reputation."
Right. And in D.C., we have something that's called papering and no papering, which is also different from other jurisdictions. And when you get no papered, which is when you are arrested, they detain you, they let you out of jail, they say, we're not putting this on your record. The no paper still sits on your record and can actually show up on a background check.
Wow.
No way.
Yes. Which is something that was supposed to be addressed with the Record Sealing Act of 2018, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head right now. But yeah, you can have things like that still sit on your record and be denied job applications and housing applications for things that are sitting on your record, but that you were not formally charged for.
And makes your livelihood that much more difficult. So that goes back to the question: is it worth allowing people to get out before their trial date?
Yes, I think it is, because you have people who are primary caregivers, you have people who are parents, and fortunately you have some places that don't take away their employment just because they were arrested. So, I mean, it is a good thing, and we also have to think about there's a presumption of innocence. You're not guilty of anything,
Right.
so you shouldn't be sitting in jail when you have never been found guilty of whatever the charge might be.
I was in jail with a guy who had been in jail for 2 years, and he was on a murder charge.
Yeah.
But he, according to him anyway, everybody's innocent in jail, but which is actually not true. A lot of people fess up. But he had cell phone data. He had cell phone data and the little cameras that are in your like outside of your door, like Ring.
Yeah.
Where there's the push button. There's the, what can I think of it? Oh, doorbell. The
Yeah.
doorbell.
Yeah.
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 So there's data from those kinds of places that exonerate him completely.
Yeah.
So it should be a fairly easy. But no, he's considered innocent right now by the law, right? He's not been proven guilty.
Right.
He's as innocent as any one of us sitting
Right.
here in the face of the law. But he's 2 years in jail.
Yeah,
and that happens all over the place.
It does. Just yesterday, I listened to the hearing on the active bill that's coming out, introduced by Councilmember Pinto. And we heard testimony from MPD, ACLU, many public authorities that are in the D.C. area. And right now, they're all saying that the average time for people between the time of their arrest and the time that they go to trial, if they choose to, is a 2 to 3 year period where they may be sitting pre-trial detained. Yeah. There's another 2 to 4 months that happen before they're actually sentenced and given the criminal punishment for whatever charge they have been found guilty of. And that's why you see about 90% of people who are pleading guilty before trial, because it speeds up the process.
Mm-hmm.
Do they get time served? And then also, is it a racially disproportionate amount of people who are falling into that trap? It's black and brown.
It's extremely. And, just looking at the failure to appear data that I have in front of me, you have people who are being charged with misdemeanor bail reform violations and felony bail reform violations. 94 to 100% of those individuals are black.
94 to 100% of those are black.
Yes.
It goes back to the slogan I have on my shirt: invest in people, not prisons.
Right.
But the government does the opposite. It's a moneymaker above some other things. It's a suppression. Though it may seem very passive, but it's a passive aggression. That's definitely felt through our communities. And we got some freedom fighters. We got people who standing up, advocates and super advocates, and your line of work that are a moral standard in an arena that's immoral. Mm-hmm. They could care less. Mm-hmm. But and we can go on and on with this topic because we can get to the race part of it and to the back scene or the backstory about it, because it's not about cleaning up the streets and things like that. Not at all.
No.
But Black Table Talk, we're gonna say that for another episode. We've ate up a lot of time, a useful time.
Yeah.
Jessa, well, thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much.
What a valuable addition to the DC Justice Lab. I call y'all the Justice League, because there's so many components to y'all.
It's not the same. You're gonna get us in trouble with copyright infringement or something.
It's you're not superheroes, but you're in a legal
arena,
fighting the bad. You know what I mean? So you're a Justice League. You know what I mean? No
you have
cartoons.
superpowers.
No superpowers.
I wish.
Takes a lot of sacrifice. A lot of time away from yourself to to pour in the things that's needed for your craft. So well, thankful that you showed up and showed out with some information, and you best believe you're just next door to us, so we'll be calling you again.
Yeah. If I could just add one more thing,
Please
that
do.
last data point that I told you. Again, based on felony and misdemeanor bail reform violations, 77% of those violations are males. So you're looking at black males.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whew. I wish we had time to dive off into that. Boy, that's something else.
We're not even bringing up class, which I think has a tremendous explanatory value here, because I've been to jail in poor white communities where I grew up, and there were no blacks at all, but the precise same details would apply to the white community there, but it's just
I think 1%. I think it was 1% of violations or failures to appear were white people. I think it was about 1%.
Tiny number.
Yeah, something like that.
What explain? That's.
Well, look, we gotta get out of here, Black Table Talk family.
Wow,
this has been good, and I wish we could just get a plate of food and eat while we're talking, because there's so much going on. But we gotta get out of here, and like we always say at the National Reentry Network for Returning Citizens, Black Table Talk, man, we're signing out, but we're never signing off, because there's always work to be done here. Y'all do good.